The starship Horizon's Promise moved slowly through the darkness of space. Its white hull shone under the light of distant stars. On the bridge, Admiral Park stood with his hands behind his back, watching the alien world grow larger on the screen. He was a tall man with gray hair at his temples and calm eyes that had seen many things. At 52 years old, he had served humanity for 3 decades, but he had never fired a weapon in anger. He believed in peace. He believed that all species in the galaxy could live together if they just tried to understand each other. "Admiral, we are entering space," said Lieutenant from her station. She was young, barely 30, with sharp eyes and a worried expression. "Their patrol ships are scanning us." "Let them scan," said quietly. "We have nothing to hide, we come with open hands." The Empire was old and powerful. They had conquered dozens of worlds and enslaved many species. Their ships were feared across the galaxy. When humanity first reached the stars, they had ignored them completely. Humans were too small, too weak, too unimportant. But saw an opportunity. The colonies were suffering from a terrible plague. Their outer worlds faced famine. He had convinced the Terran Republic to send aid, medicine, food, technology, not as tribute, not as payment, simply as a gift. Many had called him foolish. His own officers had warned him, but believed that kindness could open doors that weapons never could. The Horizon's Promise carried 300 containers of medical supplies. It carried enough grain seeds to feed 1 million people. It carried water purification systems and agricultural machines. All of it was free. All of it was offered in friendship. "We are being hailed," announced. "The command station is ordering us to proceed to there. We have been granted an audience with the High Council." Allowed himself a small smile. "You see, they are willing to talk, that is the first step." Did not look convinced, but she said nothing. The journey to Prime took 2 days. During that time, prepared his speech. He practiced the greeting customs. He studied their history and their culture. He wanted to show respect. He wanted them to see that humans valued them. When they finally arrived, that took his breath away. It was a massive planet with purple oceans and cities that reached into the clouds. Ships of all sizes filled the space around it. There were builders, whatever else they might be. A shuttle carried and his team down to the surface. Came with him, along with Doctor, the mission's medical officer and captain, who led the security team. They wore their dress uniforms, clean and simple, showing no weapons. The great hall was enormous. Its ceiling disappeared into darkness above. Thousands filled the galleries, their tall gray bodies and 4 eyes watching the humans with cold curiosity. They were bigger than humans, nearly 8 feet tall, with long arms and hard, scaled skin. At the far end of the hall sat the High Council on raised thrones, and in the center, on the highest throne, sat Overlord N. He was ancient even by standards. His scales had turned white with age, and his eyes glowed with a cruel intelligence. He wore armor of black metal and a crown of sharp points. He looked down at the humans the way a giant might look at insects. Walked forward until he stood at the base of the thrones. He bowed deeply, as custom required. "Great Overlord," he said, his voice steady and clear. "I am Admiral Park of the Terran Republic. I come in peace with gifts for your people. We have heard of the plague in your colonies. We have heard of the hunger in your outer worlds. We wish to help." He gestured, and his aides brought forward holographic displays showing the supplies they had brought. Medicine that could cure the plague, seeds that could grow in any soil, technology that could save millions of lives. "We ask for nothing in return," continued. "We offer this freely, as a sign of friendship between our peoples. We believe that the galaxy is large enough for all of us. We believe that together, we can build something better than any of us could build alone." Silence filled the great hall. Then N began to laugh. It was a terrible sound, harsh and mocking. It echoed off the walls and filled every corner of the room. Soon, the other council members joined him. Then the galleries, thousands of laughing at the small humans who had come offering help. Stood still, his face calm, though saw his hands tighten behind his back. "You offer us kindness," and finally said, his laughter dying into a sneer. "You come to the greatest empire in the galaxy with gifts, like beggars hopping for scraps of our attention." He leaned forward on his throne, his 4 eyes burning with contempt. "In our empire, human, kindness is the mark of prey. The weak offer gifts to the strong, hopping to avoid being crushed. Is that what you are, prey?" "We are not prey," said quietly. "We are neighbors, we are potential friends, we are—" "You are nothing," and interrupted. "Your species crawled out of your little planet barely a century ago. You have no fleet worth mentioning, no empire, no power, and you dare to stand in my hall and offer me charity." He waved his hand, and guards moved forward. They seized the containers of medical supplies, the agricultural technology, all of it. "We accept your tribute," and said, amused, "as is proper from a lesser species, but let us make something clear, little human." He stood from his throne and walked down the steps. He was so much larger than, but the admiral did not step back. He did not show fear. And stopped directly in front of him, looking down with those 4 terrible eyes. "You speak of friendship, of peace, of working together." He reached out and grabbed his arm, pushing up the sleeve. "Let me show you what we think of such weakness." He nodded to a guard, who brought forward a heated iron rod. Before anyone could react, the guard pressed it against his forearm. The admiral did not scream. He did not cry out. He stood perfectly still as the brand burned into his flesh, the slave mark, a symbol of ownership and submission. Started forward but grabbed her arm, holding her back. They were surrounded by thousands of enemies. Any move would mean death. When the branding was done, and released arm and returned to his throne. "There," he said, satisfied. "Now you are properly marked. Return to your little planet, human. Tell your people what happens when the weak approach the strong with kindness. And if you ever want to speak with us again, come back when you have learned what strength truly means." The guards escorted the humans out of the great hall. The laughter followed them all the way to their shuttle. On the flight back to the Horizon's Promise, no one spoke. Tried to treat Burn, but her hands were shaking with rage. "Admiral," she finally said, her voice tight, "I am so sorry. We should never have come. We should have known." "We came with open hands," said quietly, looking at the fresh brand on his arm. "We offered them friendship, medicine for their sick, food for their hungry, and they chose to answer with cruelty." He was silent for a long moment. "Lieutenant, I want you to remember this day. Remember every detail. Remember how they laughed." "Sorry." Looked up and saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. It was not hatred. It was not anger. It was something colder, something more patient. "They believe kindness is weakness," he said softly. "They believe that mercy comes from fear. One day we will teach them how wrong they are. One day they will understand that the kind are not weak. They are simply choosing not to destroy. And when the kind stop choosing peace." He looked out the window at the shrinking empires fall. The alien empire mocked his kindness. He returned with a war they couldn't survive. Part 2, The Reckoning begins. 3 years passed. The galaxy continued to turn. Stars were born and died. Ships moved through the darkness between worlds, carrying trade and war and everything in between. And the empire grew ever larger, swallowing world after world, species after species. They had forgotten the humans completely. That small delegation with their foolish gifts and their foolish talk of peace, it had become a joke told in drinking halls. The story of the human admiral who came offering friendship and left with a slave brand on his arm. It always got a good laugh. But on Earth and on the colony worlds of the Terran Republic, no one was laughing. Park sat in the war room of the newly built Terran military command. He was no longer just an admiral. The Republic had given him a new title, Supreme Commander of the Terran United Fleet. It was a position that had not existed 3 years ago, because 3 years ago there had been no United Fleet. Now there was. The holographic display in front of him showed the current state of their forces. 240 warships, each one built in secret shipyards hidden in asteroid fields and empty systems. They were smaller than ships, but faster and more advanced. Human engineers had spent 3 years making them perfect. The final ship completed construction yesterday, reported Captain standing at his side. She was no longer just a security officer. She had become his second-in-command, his chief strategist, the architect of everything they were about to do. We are at full strength. Nodded slowly, and the intelligence network. A door opened and entered the room. She had changed in 3 years. Her eyes were harder, her movements more careful. She had spent those years in the shadows, building something that might be even more important than the fleet. Operational, she said, sitting down at the table. We have agents on 47 controlled worlds. More importantly, we have contacts with every major enslaved species in their empire. She activated her own display, showing a map of space. Red dots marked slave worlds. Blue dots marked resistance contacts. The lost there to the 60 years ago. Their people have been forced to work in mining colonies ever since. They remember what freedom was. They want it back. She pointed to another cluster of worlds. They were conquered 30 years ago. They nearly destroyed their entire culture. But we helped them preserve their history, their language, their identity. They are ready to fight. Another cluster. They are nearly extinct. They hunted them for sport. There are only about 200,000 left, scattered across prison worlds. But they are the most motivated of all. They have nothing left to lose. Studied the map carefully, and they trust us, after what they have done to make every species fear each other. Smiled slightly. They trust us because we did something no one else ever did. We offered help without asking for anything in return. Word spread, Commander. The story of the human who came with medicine and food, who was branded for his kindness but never struck back in anger. It became a legend among the slave worlds. They call you the Marked One, added quietly. They say you carry the slave brand to remind yourself of a promise. Looked down at his arm. The scar was still there, ugly and permanent. He had never tried to remove it. They are not wrong, he said. The door opened again and more officers entered. Lieutenant, now promoted to commander, in charge of fleet communications. Commander Shin, a mountain of a man who would lead the ground forces. Captain O, chief medical officer, who would be responsible for treating wounded on both sides. They took their seats around the table and stood to address them. 3 years ago, I went to the Empire with open hands. I offered them friendship. I offered them aid for their sick and hungry, and they branded me like an animal and sent me away with laughter. His voice was calm, but everyone in the room could feel the weight of what was coming. They told me to return when I understood what strength truly means. I have thought about those words every day since, and I have finally understood something. He looked at each of them in turn. They believe that strength means cruelty, that power means domination, that the strong take from the weak and feel no shame, but they are wrong. He pressed a button and the display changed to show the full scope of their plan. 12 worlds marked for liberation, supply lines, fleet movements, ground assault positions. True strength is not in destruction. It is in building. It is in protecting. It is in offering help to those who suffer, even when it costs you something. They have built an empire on fear and chains. We will show the galaxy that there is another way. Stood to explain the military details. We are calling this Operation Dawn. The first phase will target 12 occupied worlds simultaneously. These are slave worlds, places where the Empire keeps the species it has conquered. Our goal is not conquest. Our goal is liberation. She highlighted each world on the map. We will strike fast, disable the garrison forces, and free the slave populations. Commander Shin's ground teams will distribute weapons to anyone who wishes to fight, medical supplies to those who need them. Transport ships will evacuate anyone who wants to leave. What about the civilians? Asked. Some of these worlds have families living there. They will not be harmed, said firmly. We are not like them. Any who does not fight will be protected. Any who surrenders will be treated with dignity. We will prove that mercy is not weakness. Shifted in his seat. He was a soldier trained to kill enemies. This was different from anything he had ever done. Commander, with respect, some of my people lost family to raids, asking them to show mercy to the enemy. I am not asking, said quietly. I am ordering, and I am explaining why. He walked to the window and looked out at the stars. If we become like them, we lose. Even if we win every battle, we lose, because then we will have proven that they were right all along. That kindness is weakness, that the only way to survive in this galaxy is through cruelty. He turned back to face them. I refuse to believe that. I will not let humanity become another empire. We will win this war, and we will win it without losing our souls. The room was silent for a long moment. Then spoke up. Commander, the fleet is ready. All ships are crewed and supplied. We can launch within 24 hours. Intelligence assets are in position, added. The resistance networks on all target worlds know we are coming. They will rise when we arrive. Medical teams are prepared, said. We have supplies for 500,000 wounded. Ground forces are eager, said, and though his voice was gruff, there was something like pride in it. They understand the mission. They will follow your orders. Nodded slowly. He had never wanted to be a war leader. He had spent his whole life believing in peace, in diplomacy, in the basic goodness of all intelligent life. That had taught him that some would never accept an open hand. But they had also taught him something else. They had shown him that the galaxy was full of species suffering under cruel masters, waiting for someone to help them, waiting for someone to show them that kindness still existed. He would be that someone. Send the word to all ships, he said. Operation Dawn begins at sunrise Earth time. Today we go to war, not for conquest, not for revenge, but for liberation. Today we teach the galaxy what humanity truly is. He looked down at the slave brand on his arm one final time. And today the Empire begins to fall. Far across the galaxy, on Prime, Overlord and was enjoying a feast. He had just received news of another successful conquest. A small species called the had finally submitted to rule after years of resistance. He raised his cup to toast his generals when an aide rushed into the hall, his 4 eyes wide with something in had never seen before. Fear. Overlord, emergency transmission from the frontier. 12 of our garrison worlds are under attack. And set down his cup slowly. Under attack by whom? They cannot fight, they have no ships, who would dare? The humans, Overlord, the humans are attacking. The great hall went silent. Everyone remembered the joke. The weak species who had come offering gifts, the admiral who had been branded and sent home in shame. An's 4 eyes narrowed. Bring me everything we know about these humans, he said, and for the first time in a very long time he was not laughing. The alien empire mocked his kindness. He returned with a war they couldn't survive. Part 3. The Liberation. The world was called 4. Before they came, it had been a paradise, green forests, clean rivers, cities full of music and art. They had lived there in peace for thousands of years. Now it was a mining colony. The forests had been burned. The rivers ran black with industrial waste, and they worked in deep tunnels, digging out precious metals for their masters. They had no rights. They had no freedom. Many of them had been born in slavery and had never known anything else. The garrison commander was named N. He was a mid-level officer who had been posted to this miserable world as punishment for some minor failure. He hated this assignment. He hated the slaves with their sad eyes and broken spirits. He hated the gray sky and the dead landscape. He was eating his morning meal when the alarms began to sound. "What is happening?" he demanded, storming into the command center. His officers were staring at their screens with expressions of disbelief. "Ships, Commander, many ships. They appeared from nowhere. They must have been hiding in the asteroid belt." "What kind of ships? Who dares attack a world?" The officer swallowed hard. "They are human ships, Commander." And almost laughed. Humans. Those weak creatures who had come begging for friendship a few years ago. This had to be a mistake. Then the first human warship descended through the clouds and stopped laughing. It was not as large as a battle cruiser, but it moved with a speed and precision that seemed impossible. Its weapons fired with perfect accuracy, destroying the garrison's defense towers in seconds. More ships followed, dozens of them, and suddenly the sky was full of human vessels. And tried to organize a defense, but his garrison was small and unprepared. The Empire had never expected anyone to attack a slave world. What would be the point? There was nothing here but prisoners and ore. The ground assault came next. Commander Shin led the first wave himself. He dropped from a transport ship with 100 soldiers, their boots hitting the ground in perfect formation. They moved through the mining complex with practiced efficiency, taking out guards before they could organize. But they did something strange, something that confused them completely. They did not kill everyone. When a soldier dropped his weapon and raised his arms in surrender, the humans did not execute him. They restrained him, took his weapons, and moved on. When they found civilians hiding in buildings, they did not harm them. They told them to stay inside and stay safe. And when they reached the slave quarters, they did not just pass through on their way to military targets. They stopped. Himself opened the first set of chains. The inside, a young male with scars covering his arms, stared at him with eyes that had forgotten how to hope. "Who are you?" they whispered. "We are humans," said simply. "We are here to free you." Across 4, the same scene repeated itself thousands of times. Human soldiers breaking chains, human medics treating wounds, human officers handing weapons to any freed slave who wanted to fight. Most of them wanted to fight. They had been waiting for this moment for 60 years. Grandparents had told their children stories of the old days, of freedom and dignity. Parents had whispered to their children that someday someone would come. Now someone had come, and they rose with a fury that surprised even. Within 6 hours, 4 was free, and was captured trying to flee in a private shuttle. He was brought before Commander Shin, expecting to be executed. That was what they did to defeated commanders. Instead, had him placed in a holding cell with food, water, and medical attention for his wounds. "Why?" and demanded, genuinely confused. "Why do you not kill me? I am your enemy." "You were my enemy," said. "Now you are my prisoner. There is a difference." "This is weakness," and insisted. "Your kindness is weakness. The Overlord was right about your species." Leaned close to the cell bars. "Your Overlord branded my Supreme Commander like a slave for offering medicine to your sick. He laughed while your people were dying of plague, because accepting help would have been seen as weakness. Is that strength? Is that what you admire?" And had no answer. "We will treat you with dignity," continued. "Not because we are weak, because we are better than you. And when this war is over, your own people will see that." He walked away, leaving the commander alone with his thoughts. On 11 other worlds, similar scenes were unfolding. On Prime, Captain O set up field hospitals in the ruins of what had once been a great library. They had burned the books, destroyed their art, tried to erase their entire culture. But they had hidden copies, preserved their history in secret. Now, medical teams treated their wounds while elders wept with joy at finally being free. She treated wounded too. Several of her own medics questioned this but was firm. Healing is not a weapon to be used only on friends, she told them. Every life we save, even enemy lives, proves that we are different from them. That is how we win. On station, a prison complex where the last survivors of the species were being held, Commander led the liberation personally. They had been hunted nearly to extinction. There were only about 50,000 left, weak and sick and without hope. Found them in cramped cells, barely alive. Some of them did not believe rescue was real. They thought it was another trick, another game before the final execution. "It is real," told them, helping an elderly female to her feet. "You are free now. You will never be prisoners again." "Who would free us?" the female asked, her voice rough from years of silence. "We have nothing to offer. We are dying species. Why would anyone care?" Thought of Admiral. She thought of the brand on his arm and the choice he had made 3 years ago. "Because someone cared," she said. "Because our commander believed that kindness matters, even when it costs you something. Especially when it costs you something." The female stared at her for a long moment. Then she began to cry, the first tears of hope she had shed in decades. News of the liberation spread faster than anyone expected. They controlled the official communication networks, but they could not control whispers. They could not stop slaves on distant worlds from hearing that someone was fighting back, that the humans were coming, that the marked one was keeping his promise. On worlds that had not yet been liberated, slave populations began to prepare. They hid weapons. They mapped guard positions. They waited. The Empire, for the first time in its long history, began to feel something unfamiliar. Fear. Overlord and received reports of the 12 fallen worlds and struggled to understand what he was reading. The humans had not just attacked, they had completely transformed every world they touched. Slave populations were now armed and organized. Prisoners were being treated well, which somehow made everything worse. "They show mercy," one of his advisors reported, clearly disturbed. "They heal our wounded. They protect our civilians. Our soldiers do not know how to respond." "Then they will learn," and growled. "This changes nothing. Send the regional fleets. Crush these humans and reclaim our worlds." "Overlord, there is something else. The freed slaves, even they are fighting alongside the humans. They are not just waiting to be rescued. They are becoming an army." Anne's 4 eyes narrowed. An army of slaves. An army of free people, Overlord. That is what they are calling themselves now. For a long moment, Anne was silent. He remembered the human admiral who had stood in his throne room, offering gifts with such naive sincerity. He remembered the satisfaction of branding that soft arm, of teaching the human what power really meant. But now, looking at the reports of burning garrison worlds and rising slave populations, and began to wonder if he had made a terrible mistake. "Find me everything about this admiral," he commanded. "I want to know who he is, where he came from, what drives him." He stared at the map of his empire, watching the red warning lights multiply. "And prepare the Obsidian Armada. If these humans want a war, I will give them one they cannot survive." Far away on the bridge of the Horizon's Promise, Admiral Park received the final reports from all 12 liberated worlds. The operation had succeeded beyond all expectations. Millions were free. The coalition forces had taken minimal casualties, and across the galaxy, hope was spreading like fire. Stood beside him, studying the tactical display. "They will respond with everything they have," she said. "The Obsidian Armada has 3,000 ships. We have less than 300, even with our new allies." Nodded slowly. "I know, but we have something they do not." "What is that?" He looked at the reports from the liberated worlds. Soldiers standing side by side with humans, pilots flying captured ships, warriors, thought to be nearly extinct, rising to fight one more time. We have people fighting for freedom instead of fear. We have allies who chose to join us instead of being forced. And we have proven that kindness is not weakness, it is the strongest weapon of all. He straightened and turned to address his crew. Send word to all coalition forces. Phase 1 is complete. Now we prepare for Phase 2. He paused, looking at the distant stars where the Obsidian Armada was gathering. Now we show them what the kind can do when they go to war. The alien empire mocked his kindness. He returned with a war they couldn't survive. Part 4: The Tide of War. The nebula was beautiful. Clouds of purple and gold gas stretched across millions of kilometers, lit from within by young stars. Ancient spacers said the nebula was haunted by the ghosts of dead civilizations. After today, they would have new ghosts to talk about. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of the Horizon's Promise, watching the sensor displays with calm eyes. Around him, his officers worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. They all knew what was coming. Fleet entering the nebula, reported Commander. 3,200 ships confirmed. They have brought their entire Obsidian Armada. 3,000 ships, the pride of the Empire. They had conquered dozens of worlds with this fleet. They had crushed rebellions, destroyed civilizations, and built an empire on the broken bodies of their enemies. No force had ever stood against them and survived. The coalition fleet had 287 ships. They outnumber us more than 10 to 1, said Captain, studying the tactical display. Their flagship alone carries more firepower than our entire 3rd Squadron. Nodded yes, and yet here we are. He turned to look at his bridge crew, humans who had volunteered for this mission knowing the odds. They were afraid. He could see it in their eyes, but they were here anyway. Do you know why we chose this location? He asked them. The nebula is not strategically important. We could have made our stand anywhere. No one answered. We chose it because this is where they destroyed the people 200 years ago. There were peaceful traders who refused to submit to the Empire. They burned their entire civilization and scattered the survivors across slave worlds. He gestured at the beautiful clouds of gas surrounding them. This nebula is their grave. Today, we honor them by beginning the end of the empire that murdered them. Looked up from her station. Admiral, the enemy fleet is hailing us. They are demanding our immediate surrender. Put it on screen. The main display flickered, and the face of an admiral appeared. He was younger than N, but his 4 eyes held the same arrogant contempt. I am Fleet Commander, or of the Obsidian Armada. You are the human who was branded in our throne room, yes, the one who begged for friendship. I am Admiral Parks. I offered friendship. I did not beg. Or made a sound that might have been a laugh. You brought 200 ships against 3,000. This is not war. This is suicide. Surrender now and I will make your deaths quick. Continue to fight and I will burn every human world in the galaxy. Your species will join thee as a memory. Was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice steady and calm. Fleet Commander, I have a counteroffer. Withdraw your ships and return to space. Release all enslaved species. Accept the new reality of a galaxy where your empire no longer rules through fear. Do this, and the war ends today. Or stared at him. You are insane. You are surrounded and outnumbered. You have no position to negotiate. Perhaps you do not understand what you are truly facing today. Gestured to his crew, and the communication channel expanded to include hundreds of other ships, not just human ships but vessels of every shape and size, crewed by and a dozen other species. Your empire was built on the belief that the conquered have no power, that slaves will always obey. That fear is stronger than hope. His voice hardened. You were wrong. Every species you tortured, every world you burned, every chain you forged, they all remember, and today they have come to remind you. As if on cue, more signals appeared on the sensor display. ships emerging from hidden positions within the nebula, ships that had been waiting for this moment, warships rebuilt from salvage, fighters fast and deadly, even old vessels hidden for 2 centuries and now crewed by the descendants of survivors. The coalition fleet was still outnumbered, but not by as much as before. Or's expression changed. For just a moment, uncertainty flickered in his 4 eyes. "This changes nothing," he said, but his voice was less confident. "You cannot defeat the Obsidian Armada with a collection of slave ships and stolen relics." "Then come and prove it," said simply. He cut the communication. Stepped to his side. "Admiral, even with our allies, we are still at a significant disadvantage. Our only hope is the Talon Formation." The Talon Formation. It was developed over 3 years of careful planning. It was risky. It was unconventional. It required perfect coordination and absolute trust between ships of different species. But it was their only chance. "All ships," announced over the fleet-wide channel, "this is your admiral. Today we fight not for territory or resources. We fight for everyone who ever suffered under cruelty. We fight for the memory of the dead and the hope of the living. Whatever happens in the next hours, know that I am proud to serve alongside you, all of you." He paused, then gave the order that would begin the largest space battle in galactic history. "Execute Talon Formation. All ships attack." The Battle of Nebula lasted 14 hours. In the first hour, they pressed forward with overwhelming force, confident in their numbers. But the coalition ships did not stand and fight like traditional fleets. They moved and scattered, using the nebula clouds for cover, striking at weak points and withdrawing before they could respond. Lieutenant Commander Han led the fighter wings. She was 24 years old, barely more than a child by some standards, but she flew like a demon. Her small ship danced between cruisers, her weapons finding weak spots that seemed impossible to hit. She had painted names on her ship's hull: her mother, her father, her younger brother, all killed by raiders when she was 12 years old. She had grown up in a refugee camp dreaming of this day. "Fighter Wing 7, follow me," she commanded, leading her pilots through a gap in the formation. "Target their communication ships, cut them off from each other." One by one, the coordination ships exploded. Without them, the massive armada began to lose cohesion. Ships that were used to operating as one perfect machine started making independent decisions, and not all of those decisions were good. By the 5th hour, they had lost 400 ships. The coalition had lost 60. The numbers still favored the Empire, but the gap was closing. Commander Shin led the boarding parties. His soldiers landed on damaged vessels and fought their way to the bridges. They took prisoners when they could. They killed when they had to. But they did not torture. They did not execute the wounded. And strange stories began to spread among the crews, stories of human soldiers offering medical aid to enemies who surrendered. Some captains began to wonder if surrender might not be the worst option. By the 10th hour, something remarkable happened. A destroyer broke from the armada and broadcast a surrender signal. Then another, then 3 more. Fleet Commander Or screamed at his captains to return to formation. He threatened execution for cowardice, but the threats that had always worked before seemed hollow now. His captains had seen something they had never expected to see: an enemy who showed mercy, an enemy who treated prisoners with dignity, an enemy who fought not with hatred but with purpose. For soldiers who had grown weary of cruelty, it was a revelation. By the 14th hour, the Obsidian Armada was broken. 2,000 ships drifted dead in the nebula, their hulls torn open to space. Another 300 had surrendered. The rest were fleeing toward space, their proud formations scattered and broken. Or's flagship was surrounded by coalition ships. He had refused to surrender, refused to accept that everything he believed had been proven wrong. But now his weapons were silent, his engines dead, his crew begging him to save their lives. Admiral contacted him one final time. Fleet Commander, your armada is destroyed. Your ships are fleeing. You have two choices. Surrender and be treated with the dignity we have shown all our prisoners, or die alone in the darkness, proving nothing except that pride is not the same as strength. Or's 4 eyes stared at him through the screen. His face was twisted with emotions, rage, disbelief, and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. How, he finally asked. How did you do this? We had 3,000 ships. We had the greatest fleet in the galaxy. How did you defeat us with kindness? Was quiet for a moment, then he answered. You built your empire on fear. You forced species to serve you because they had no other choice. But fear is a weak foundation. The moment something stronger appears, fear crumbles. He gestured at the fleet around him, the mixed ships of a dozen species all fighting together. We built our coalition on hope, on trust, on the radical idea that people will fight harder for freedom than they ever will for a master. That is how we defeated you, not with more ships or bigger weapons. With a better reason to fight. Or was silent for a long time. Then slowly, he reached for his communication console. All remaining vessels, this is Fleet Commander Or, I am ordering a full surrender. Cease fire and await coalition instructions. His voice dropped to a whisper that the humans were not meant to hear. May the ancestors forgive us for what we have become. Across the nebula, ships went dark. The battle was over. Stood beside as the reports came in. They had won. Against all odds, against everything the galaxy thought was possible, they had won. What now? She asked quietly. Looked at the distant star that marked the direction of Prime, the place where he had been branded like an animal for offering help. Now, he said, we finish what we started, we go to Prime. And then touched the scar on his arm, the slave brand that had started everything. He wanted to teach me about strength. I think it is time I returned the lesson. The alien empire mocked his kindness. He returned with a war they couldn't survive. Part 5, The Return. The sky above Prime was full of ships. The citizens of the great empire looked up and saw the fleet that had destroyed their obsidian armada. Human vessels flew alongside cruisers, fighters, and ships from a dozen other species that had been slaves just weeks ago. The purple clouds parted as the coalition descended toward the capital city. Overlord stood in his throne room surrounded by his remaining guards. The reports had been coming in for hours, each one worse than the last. The frontier worlds gone, the armada destroyed, the slave species rising everywhere throwing off their chains. His empire, built over centuries of conquest and cruelty, was crumbling. Overlord, said one of his advisors, approaching carefully. The human fleet is requesting communication. Their admiral wishes to speak with you. An's 4 eyes burned with hatred. The branded one, the fool who came begging for friendship. He laughed bitterly. Let him speak. I want to hear what the insect has to say. The throne room's main display activated, and the face of Admiral Park appeared. He looked older than An remembered, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes. But his expression was the same calm steadiness that had so annoyed the Overlord 3 years ago. Overlord An said, we meet again. So we do, human. I see you finally found your strength. You burned my worlds, you destroyed my fleet, you turned my slaves against me, and spread his long arms. Are you proud of yourself? Have you become the monster you once claimed to despise? No, said simply. I freed the worlds you conquered. I defeated the fleet you sent to destroy us. I gave hope to people who had none. That is not the work of a monster. Pretty words, but you have come to conquer, to take revenge, to burn my as I burned so many others. And leaned forward on his throne. Do it then. Prove that you are no different from me. Was quiet for a moment. Then he did something that An did not expect. He began to broadcast his message not just to the throne room, but to the entire planet. People of 3 years ago, I came to your world with open hands. I offered friendship, medicine for your sick, food for your hungry. Your leaders chose to answer with cruelty. They branded me like an animal and sent me away with laughter." His voice was calm, but it carried across every city, every home, every gathering place on Prime. "Now I return with the strength they demanded I learn. My fleet surrounds your world. Your armada is broken. Your empire is falling. By any measure, I have earned the right to burn your cities and scatter your people as your leaders did to so many others." He paused, and then felt a cold fear that he had never experienced before. "But I will not." The words hung in the air. "I am still the same man who came here offering help. I still believe that kindness is not weakness. I still believe that mercy is the highest form of strength. So here is my offer to the people of." The entire planet listened. "Surrender peacefully and no civilian will be harmed. Your soldiers who lay down their weapons will be treated with dignity. Your wounded will receive medical care. Your world will not be bombed. Your cities will not burn. This, I swear on the scar your overlord gave me." He raised his arm, showing the slave brand that had never healed. "You have 6 hours to decide. I pray you choose wisely." The transmission ended, and stood in the sudden silence, his mind racing. This was wrong. This was not how wars worked. The humans should want revenge. They should want blood. Why were they offering mercy? "It is a trick," he said to his advisors. "It must be. They want to get us to lower our defenses and then they will attack." But his advisors were looking at each other with strange expressions. Some of them had family in the outer worlds, family who had been treated kindly by coalition forces after the liberation. Some of them had heard the stories of human medics treating wounded. What if it was not a trick? "Overlord," one of them said carefully, "perhaps we should consider." "Consider what? Surrender." En's voice rose to a roar. "I am the overlord of the empire. I do not surrender to insects. I do not bow to creatures who think kindness is strength." He stormed to his private chamber where his most trusted weapon waited. The Void Heart, a doomsday device that could crack the planet's core. If he could not rule Prime, no one would. "If they want my world," he muttered, activating the ancient machine, "they can have it in ashes." But he did not know that Sergeant No was already inside the palace. She was young for her rank, only 28, but she had proven herself in a dozen operations across the liberated worlds. She moved through the ancient corridors like a shadow, avoiding patrols marking targets. Her team followed close behind, 2 humans, and, remarkably, a defector named N. N had surrendered at the Battle of Nebula. He had been treated well. He had talked to other prisoners, heard their stories, begun to question everything he had been taught. When the coalition asked for volunteers who knew the palace layout, he had stepped forward. "The Overlord's private chamber is this way," he whispered now, leading them through a hidden passage. "If he has activated the Void Heart, it will be there." "How do we stop it?" asked. "There are manual controls, but N will not leave it unguarded." They moved faster. In the throne room, things were falling apart. Commanders had begun signaling surrender without authorization. Some of them had simply had enough of cruelty, enough of fear, enough of serving a leader who would rather destroy his own world than accept defeat. Coalition forces began landing in the capital, met not with weapons but with crowds of confused citizens who had expected invaders but found liberators. Human soldiers set up medical stations and food distribution points. Officers, former slaves, walked the streets where they had once been whipped, and they did not seek revenge. They offered help. The people of Prime watched with growing amazement. This was not how conquerors behaved. Deep in the palace, team reached the Overlord's chamber just as N was entering the final activation code for the Void Heart. He looked up as they burst through the door, his 4 eyes widening with rage. "You dare invade my sanctum." "Step away from the device," commanded, her weapon raised. and laughed a bitter, broken sound. "You are too late, human. The countdown has begun. In 10 minutes this world dies. Your precious coalition will have nothing but rubble." And moved past and approached the ancient machine. His hands trembled as he studied the controls. "Traitor," and spat at him. "Weak-minded fool." "I was weak when I followed you," En replied quietly. "I am strong now." He began working on the deactivation sequence and lunged for a weapon but was faster. She tackled him to the ground, restraining him with practiced efficiency. He was larger than her, stronger, but she had been trained for this. And she had something he lacked: hope. The countdown clock ticked down. 8 minutes, 7, 6. En's hands flew over the controls. He had studied this system decades ago, before it was sealed away as too dangerous to use. The codes were ancient, the technology almost forgotten. 5 minutes, 4. "I cannot stop it completely," he said, his voice tight with fear. "But I can redirect the energy, away from the core, into space." "Do it," ordered. 3 minutes, 2. En entered the final commands. The machine shuddered. Warning lights flashed. 1 minute. The void heart fired. But instead of tearing into Prime's core, the energy beam shot upward into space, harmless and brilliant, a pillar of light that could be seen across the entire system. And screamed in frustration. Hours later, he was dragged into the same throne room where he had once branded Admiral. The Great Hall was full now: coalition officers, freed slaves, citizens, and representatives of a dozen species. They had all come to witness this moment. Admiral Park stood where En had once sat. He was not on the throne. He had refused to take it, but his presence filled the room. 2 guards brought the former overlord before him, and was in chains now, his white scales dull, his 4 eyes red with exhaustion and rage. "Kill me," he demanded. "Execute me before your slaves. Show them your true nature." Studied the broken tyrant for a long moment. "You still do not understand," he said quietly. "After everything, after watching your empire fall because you could not imagine that kindness could win, you still think cruelty is the only form of power." He stepped closer to En. "I will not kill you. I will not give you the martyrdom you want. Instead, you will stand trial, a fair one. You will be charged with every crime, every death, every chain. The galaxy will hear the truth of what you did, and then a court made up of every species you harmed will decide your fate." And stared at him. "That is not justice, that is weakness." "That is human justice," replied. "The kind you mocked 3 years ago, the kind you said would never matter." He turned to address the assembled crowd. "The war is over. The empire as it was no longer exists, but we have not come to conquer. We have come to build something new, a galaxy where strength is measured not by the chains you forge but by the hands you offer, where the weak are protected, not exploited, where kindness is not weakness but the foundation of everything." Captain stepped to his side as the guards led him away. "Was it worth it?" she asked quietly. "Holding on to who we are even while we fought?" Touched the slave brand on his arm, the scar he had carried for 3 years, the reminder of what he had chosen and what he had refused to become. "The galaxy believed kindness was weakness," he said softly. "That mercy meant submission. We showed them the truth, that compassion requires more strength than cruelty ever could, and that when the kind go to war, empires fall." 1 year later, the Galactic Accord was signed in the same throne room wherein had once ruled. 17 species pledged themselves to mutual protection and cooperation, humans, and even many who had seen a better way. Admiral Park retired from military service. He spent his remaining years leading humanitarian efforts, rebuilding the worlds the old empire had destroyed. The brand on his arm never faded. He refused to have it removed. "It reminds me," he told a journalist who asked about it, "of who I was the day they gave it to me, and who I still chose to be when I came back. Across the galaxy, the story spread. Parents told it to their children. Teachers taught it in schools. And when new species encountered humanity for the first time, they always asked the same question. Is it true that you once conquered an empire by being kind? The humans just smiled. Because they knew the truth. They had not conquered an empire. They had freed a galaxy, and they had done it without losing themselves. That was the greatest victory of all.